Aaron Donald, you heard in the offseason, I don't know if I'm coming back. I'm coming back. He takes that big contract, really puts them in salary hell, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And he had a horrible – I know we're going to say his numbers are still pretty good for Aaron Donald. I mean, for any other player. But for Aaron Donald, they're not good numbers. Aaron Donald's had one of his worst years. This is a guy that for 8 years straight, he was an all-pro player. This year, there's no way he's an all-pro player. I don't care what anybody says. He's not the best defensive lineman in the league. As a matter of fact, there are two big guys, one on Carolina and one for the Jets, that absolutely are better than he is this year.
And so is Chris Jones, Dexter Lawrence, and Christian Wilkins.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I think it's, he's still a great player. He's dealing with injuries. He's missed a couple games, but he still's grading in like the 90s in PFF scoring. So he's still an elite player, but I think you're right. I think this is the first year in a really long time we're seeing some competition for him, right? I think Chris Jones is the number one guy, I would say there. He's having an elite season. And he would have had that season last year if they didn't try to move him to edge, but they moved him to edge. They didn't have any other pass rush, so he was just getting, boxed out. But this year he's showing really what kind of talent he is. And I did want to finish the question that you asked earlier.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Yep.
No, of course, about the Vikings, right? So the Vikings now, they're going to be the number one team in the NFC North. They're going to have potentially going to be, hosting a lot of home games this playoff during the playoffs. And, Kirk Cousins, for the first time in his career, is proving that he can play some clutch football. Do I think he's great? And do I think that he's a Super Bowl quarterback? No. But do I think that he can take them, a few rounds into the playoffs? Absolutely. So I think this Vikings team is one of the most competitive teams we've seen from them in a long time. And it's actually something that we talked about at All 22 at the beginning of the season. They were our team that we said is going to be the biggest breakout because they added the most value at valuable positions, right? It's so underrated, right? And it goes to the teams that draft running backs in the first, second round, right? Like, it just doesn't work out. Those teams don't make it to the Super Bowl. Saquon Barkley, right? Like the Giants, getting a guy like that doesn't really add value. But when you add edge rushers and you add tackles like Christian Darrisaw and you add players to your defensive back group, corners and safeties is what they spent their picks on this year. Those are all really valuable positions. And in All 22, if you're an owner, that's like the same approach you want to take. You don't want to draft a running back in the first round. You want to go after those high-end positions like corner, tackle, edge rusher, quarterback, because that's how you build the nucleus of your team. And it's kind of funny because we say that we base our game on what the NFL does. And you see that translation. And that's kind of what we called out at the beginning of the year. We were like, oh, so the Vikings added all of this talent at valuable positions. That's what we would do. I think they're going to be successful. And turns out like that's exactly what happened. They have been extremely successful. And I didn't even mention Za'Darius Smith, right? They added edge rushers too. So I just wanted to finish off.
In the words of Mike Francesa, they stink, okay? And there is no way in hell, I'm telling you, that team is going to win more than one game in the playoffs. The Jets should have beaten them. They lost against the Lions last week. They're not a good team. And every single game, they've won by barely anything. And yes, they're definitely better when it comes to adding pieces in the offseason. That has not shown on the field. And we had our friends.
Yep. Pete Bursich.
We had Pete Bursich on the show last week, and we love him. We love Pete, and he knows his stuff. He's the Vikings play-by-play guy on the radio, and ex-Viking and ex-NFL player, fantastic personality, really, really nice guy. But I told him, I said, the Jets are going to have a chance to win that game, and the Jets should have won that game. They were six times in the red zone. That defense, Smith is the only half-decent guy that I could say from that defense that looked decent in that game. That defense looked horrible, and if they play a high-powered offense in the NFC in the first round, obviously they're not going to be a wild-card team, but nevertheless, if they have to play in the first round against any of these elite offenses or defenses, good luck. I don't think they're going to win. I don't think they're any good. I really don't. I think they're overrated. I think Justin Jefferson sees the ball 13, 15 times a game. And for that, I mean, when you have an elite player like that, and by the way, he had problems against the Jets. If you watch the game, the two games that he looked bad in were against two elite defenses, Philadelphia and the Jets. Those two teams that have great secondary shut him down, made him work for every catch he made in the game. if he plays against a good defensive team. Oh, by the way, the Cowboys, demolished him too. So if he plays against good secondary teams or guys that actually can stop him, he's going to have problems. They're going to have problems because you see Kirk Cousins, and I don't think anybody's blinded to see. By the way, we are talking to co-founder of All 22 Premium Fantasy Football, Chris Lombardi. You have seen the Minnesota Vikings play against elite teams. They have beaten all the bad teams. Against the good teams, go look at their record against the good teams, the 500 teams. They're not good. So I'm not trusting in the Minnesota Vikings going into the playoffs against the elite teams in the NFC or even going to the Super Bowl, which I do not believe they're going to be there. And that's because of Kirk Cousins, because I don't trust him in the big game. And to me, he's mediocre. And I like him better than some of the quarterbacks and starting quarterbacks in the league. But that's not saying much because there might be 4 elite quarterbacks in the whole NFL. And that says a lot about where the NFL is going in the quarterback position.
Absolutely. So I'm going to say something a little controversial, and it's something that I feel very strongly. The NFC is full of very good teams with strong defenses, and they've been underrated, right? Because everybody wants flashy offense. But guess what? The NFC won the last 2 Super Bowls, right? And the NFC always ends up being very strong. The Philadelphia Eagles this year, there's a chance they truly are the best team in the NFL. I hate to say it because, I know a lot of Giants fans in New York are going to hate that I said that too, but they're a fantastic team. They might have the deepest roster in the NFL. They're going to give anyone a fight. And I think, to what you said, right? The Lions beat the Vikings, so they're not that good of a team. What it really might mean is that the Lions are actually a pretty good team. And top to bottom, if you look at that roster, I think you'd come to that same conclusion.
I don't know if you listened to my show. My second favorite team growing up were the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm a Donovan McNabb fan. I love Donovan McNabb. I met him in Miami, had a long conversation with him. I know everything about Donovan McNabb. So when the Jets were never making the playoffs, I would root for the Philadelphia Eagles. I like the Philadelphia Eagles. As good as they are on paper, there is deficiencies that this team has. And when you get into the playoffs and when it comes to the nitty and the gritty with, you're going into the fourth quarter and the game is close against the Cowboys and Micah Parsons or against maybe the Seattle Seahawks. And even though their defense isn't good, you're gunslinging against Geno Smith or one of these, their running game and Kenneth Walker, if he's running the ball and controlling the clock. As good as your team is, and we've seen it, if you can run the ball and you can play defense, you don't need an elite quarterback. You don't need elite, top-end, all-purpose defense. Defense and offense and special teams. You can win. And there are a few teams in the NFC that can run the ball really, really good, and they can play defense. So do I believe the the Eagles are as elite as everybody says they are? I do believe on paper they are. Do I think that do I think there's more AFC teams that could beat them in a one-game playoff? Absolutely. Kansas City could beat them right now. Absolutely. Buffalo could beat them right now, even with Josh Allen not playing as well as he has. The Bengals could beat them right now. The way Joe Burrow is playing right now and the way that defense is playing and that offensive line is actually blocking for him. And I could go on and on and on. There are teams right now in the AFC that I believe matching, the NFC is easy. I mean, look who they have to play. They have to play the Giants twice. They got to play Washington twice. They got to play the Cowboys. The Cowboys are a good defense. Their offense is, you don't know what that offense is going to show up to. You don't know what Dak Prescott's going to throw. And then you could go up and down. The Packers, they don't have anything to help Aaron Rodgers. So if they play the Packers, they're not making the playoffs. But if they do, I'm not going to bet on the Packers either. I mean, Tampa, give me a break. And I'm not taking shots at Tom Brady. It's not the same Tom Brady. And that team isn't the same. And they got Todd Bowles as their head coach. And then you go into that division with Seattle, the Arizona Cardinals, the Rams, and all the garbage, and San Francisco. I like San Francisco. Are you going to trust a third-string quarterback in a big game away to win you that big game? And the answer is, I don't. So, and I like Purdy. I like his story. I like everything. Love his father crying out in the audience. It's great. It's a great story. Maybe they can make a movie out of it after the season's over. I could care less. They're not winning with Purdy. So if Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't come back like they say he is, they're not winning. So who do they have to beat? Minnesota? Give me a break. I think a peewee football team in a big game that can run the ball against that defense, okay? The Jets were running all over that defense. All over that defense. And when it comes down to the playoffs, the best teams in the playoffs are teams that can run the ball, control the clock. Tom Brady, you know this. You're a numbers guy. Look at Tom Brady's numbers in the Super Bowl. But he's won 7 Super Bowls. Could you name all 7 games and the best games he had? I can. He's had 2 good games out of the 7 Super Bowls he was in. 2. Mm-hmm. What does that tell you about Tom Brady? And he's the greatest quarterback of all time. He's the GOAT. Okay? It tells me one thing. People forget what wins games. It's a team game. Football is the ultimate team game. You go watch hockey, Connor McDavid can win games by himself. He can, okay? We've seen it. Baseball, it's if you have a dominant pitcher, you can keep the game close, and then all you got to do is get a hit, and it's a home run. You can win that game 1-0, okay? It's not an ultimate team. It really isn't. And then basketball, give me a break. We all know basketball, okay? And these are the 4 biggest sports. In football, the quarterback could be playing great. If the defense isn't, you're not winning. If your special teams makes a huge mistake or 2 big mistakes and your defense and offense is killing it, those two big mistakes could cost you a game.
Oh, don't tell him about special teams. He's a Packers fan. He doesn't have to hear about that.
Let's not get into that game last year, okay? That made me sick to my stomach.
Don't make me talk about that. No,
yeah, and honestly, everybody blamed Aaron Rodgers for that game. That is a crock of you-know-what, okay? That was not Aaron Rodgers' fault. That had everything to do with the special teams, and what the special teams were doing in that punt return makes me sick to my stomach, okay? I don't know what they were thinking when the ball was up in the air, okay? It just it shows you how stupid, obviously, the coaches were in the sidelines in that game. So
I bet the Packers are hoping that they could go with the Ian Hartitz method of football. Guest of our show as well.
The LaFleur family.
Who wants to ban kickers and punters.
The LaFleur family, and I know all about the LaFleur family because we have one that is a horrible offensive coordinator. He is the reason why the Jets lost against the Minnesota Vikings because all he had to do with a 6'5" quarterback is on the 1-yard line with 3 downs. 3 downs. All he had to do was quarterback sneak, and the Jets win the game. That's all the Jets needed to do, and he didn't do it.
Don't get me started on the LaFleurs. I mean, I was so mad when the Packers made that hire a few years ago. He was Tennessee's offensive coordinator. I don't even think he was play calling at the time, and
he only was in the second half of the season.
Right, and they weren't even good, right? So how do you then go and just raise him because he's young and because he's a decent looking dude?
He's a pretty boy. That's what he is.
He got hired a lot because of the way Derrick Henry broke out that second half.
What's up with these coaches too? You have McVay, pretty boy with a supermodel a wife. I don't know. You have now Matt LaFleur, pretty boy. His brother Mike LaFleur, pretty boy. All these pretty boys.
You have one in Arizona that might not last very long.
Another pretty boy. All these pretty boy coaches.
He should have been fired years ago.
He just got an extension. He just got an extension. He's not going anywhere.
I have a good feeling he'll be out very soon.
I think he's got another year.
Him and Kyler Murray are attached to the hip now, so
I think he's got another year. I think they're going to give him another year. And after what happened in New Mexico with one of the coaches, nobody even knows the story. They took it out of Hard Knocks. They didn't want anybody to see in a Hard Knocks. I wonder why. Whatever he did was probably illegal, and they just tried to take it, put it in a present box for Christmas and say, here you go. We're just going to fire you so we don't ruin your career as a coach if you want another job in the NFL. So they hid that from Hard Knocks and everything like that. So it's despicable. And honestly, I don't understand where these coaches are coming from because everything that I've seen, and this is all from Kyle Shanahan. These are from his tree. Go look at his tree. And I'm not saying his tree is bad. His tree is pretty good.
It's pretty good.
It really is. It's really good. And teams and coaches that have gone pretty far in the playoffs. Here's the problem. How many of them have won?
It's true. It's a good point.
How many of them won? I'm sorry. Sean McVay won. Finally won, ladies and gentlemen. And you know why he won? Because the team traded away every single asset for the next 10 years. So great move by the Rams. They'll never win again.